Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Families Together's final town hall for 2024. Today's town hall is on youth justice. I'm Paige Pierce. I'm the CEO at Families Together in New York State. We're really pleased to be able to again offer these town halls. They've been such a hit for the past 3 years that we can't stop doing them. We joke that it's an opportunity for the commissioners to be answering questions in front of the legislators. It's like a friendlier version of their budget hearings. We are really pleased also to remind everyone that on Friday of this week at noon, we're going to be having an informational session about the upcoming Family Empowerment Day. Family Empowerment Day, if you don't know already, is on Tuesday, the 19th of March at the Legislative Office Building on State Street in Albany. You can go to our website to see more about how to register for the Family Empowerment Day, and then also to be able to get the link for the informational session, which is on Friday at noon. I want to take a second too to say thank you to Brad Hansen and Zach Kilmer, who have organized these town halls. This is the 6th one this year, and they just do a phenomenal job of being able to organize just a very challenging schedule of legislators and commissioners, as well as all of us, and to put together really compelling questions to ask those folks so that we can get answers to the things that are our priority agenda items at Families Together for 2024. We have today with us the commissioner from DCJS, but also we will be having the Senator Senator Bailey, who is the chair in the Senate of this committee. So we'll be having him join us shortly, but we wanted to get started to give the commissioner time to introduce herself and to talk a little bit about, just for a few minutes about what DCJS is up to, knowing that we're going to be asking her some of those same questions in a second. But Commissioner, I turn it over to you.
Such a rookie mistake. Thank you. And thank you for having me. It's my pleasure, to join you. I love town halls, and, my former career was as a journalist. So I spent so many years asking people questions, and now, I enjoy being on the other side most of the time of being here to answer your questions. So I've been at DCJS now it was 2 years in November. And when I arrived at the agency, the budget was like 240 million, and today the budget is about 850 million. So since I've been here, the governor has made incredible investments into this work. And what is wonderful about that for me is that, her mandate to me was, we fund, as many of you know, DCJS basically provides resources and support to the broad, kind of spectrum that is what we call the criminal justice system. Including, even though we don't run the courts, including to some extent the communication between the courts and, let's say, criminal records and things like that. We have research, we train, we touch most of the practitioners, the professionals in the criminal justice system. So cops and sheriffs, DAs, probation officers and all of that. And so her mandate, when she asked me to come here, was that we have to also bring kind of this level of resources and funding specifically, but also technical support to communities. And so I take that mission very seriously, that our role is to help to make communities whole. And the reason that, the reason for that, I think that's the role of government, but also because our policies, as a society resulted in very adverse results, for some communities. And so I take very seriously the mission of helping to repair some of the stuff of the past as we fund law enforcement so that they can do the work that communities depend on them to do, which is solve crimes, right? And as we retrain them and as we tell them how we want them, right, to move in our communities, we also have to invest in the ability of communities to both have input into those policies, to build resilience to, all that comes at them, and to have a role in the prevention, right? So when I got here, we were just at the end of the pandemic. And so that was a crisis. And then we had the shootings were way up, crime was up during the pandemic. So that was the crisis last year. So we brought that down. We survived a little, you know, we can say the pandemic is mostly behind us. And we brought the shootings down, and across the state in the communities where we were targeting those crimes, we've been successful. So this year is very important. We have time to do what we couldn't do in the crisis, is to deal, you know, when you're in a crisis, you deal with what's urgent. I always call that the tyranny of the urgent. And so you deal with what's urgent. This happens at home too. Whatever's urgent, that's what you pay attention to. What happens when you're dealing with what's urgent is you don't focus on what's important. And for me, this is important. I believe, you know, our youth across the board are in crisis, and this is important. And it's not something that we can solve with criminal justice policy specifically. It's something that we have to solve with investing in communities, investing in youth, and in my opinion, just listening, right? Seeing them and listening, and also collectively going back to a sense of community where we see all kids as all our kids, right? Where we see, regardless of what neighborhoods they're in, regardless of what color they are, regardless of what school systems they're in or stuck in, that we see them and that we treat them as our kids, as a collective. So anyway, I'll stop there because you can see I can talk about this forever. But I believe that DCJS is fully sees itself as an agency, and as the people in it, we see ourselves as part of the solution. And we want to be very careful not to be part of the problem, and not to and to look for ways to fund innovation and smaller organizations that may not, you know, it's very hard to do business with the state, as many of you know. So we've been successful with Project Rise. We've been successful in going beyond kind of that. We went to the big organizations and said, we're going to give you some money, but you got to give a quarter of it to these small organizations. And once you identify, the community identifies who's doing the work, then we will work over the next few years to bring them to a level where they can, you know, they can then apply for funds on their own. And that, you know, that takes a lot. The state is going through a system change. I'm sure you've been touched by that change. But the bottom line is that we're here to help, and we see ourselves as, we take seriously our role as people in government who are supposed to help, you know, kind of clear the path and help to find solutions and fund the solutions that the communities have already identified. So I'll stop there. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. And be careful what you offer when you say I could talk forever about, because we've got some very compelling questions, and this, we've got an hour. So it's wonderful to have you here to be as frank as you are. And also, we appreciate when you say that you want to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. That's exactly what families and young people say all the time. We're not looking to buck up against the system for the sake of bucking up against it. We're here to be part of the solution. And our motto at Families Together is nothing about us without us, meaning that we have some, you know, unique perspective because of our lived experience that can help lawmakers and policy shapers do your work, because we can give you the perspective that we have, and it will help make for better outcomes. So thanks again for your remarks, and we're looking forward to hearing more from you. And when the senator comes on, Brad, if you could just, you know, take a second to introduce him if it's in between questions. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Brad Hanson, who's going to be our moderator today. Brad?
Thank you, and thank you, everybody. Thank you, Paige, and thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, everybody in the audience, for being here. I already, in your opening remarks, Commissioner, there's so much that I love about what you said and that I recognize in what DCGS specifically is doing. And as a reminder to everyone, you know, Families Together was one of the leading organizations advocating for reforms like raise the age, raise the lower age, and trying to bring funding and resources on the community level to those most directly impacted by them. And that's why we like ideas, innovative ideas like the Project Rise, which empower communities to really decide what they want and who they trust, and most importantly. And you know, as a network that believes in the idea of peer support and credible messengers, those ideas, there's room for growth. But certainly got to recognize when a state agency starts to make progress, and that's something that I can definitely say about DCGS. I'm now going to pass it to our first ambassador, Tanya Hernandez from Buffalo.
Hello. this like segues right into my question. This whole, it takes a village. And I think that's what you were alluding to, Commissioner. So I've been a juvenile justice advocate for 17 plus years. You stop counting after a while. You just go and as a mother, I had 3 children, 3 sons enter the juvenile justice system. And the isolation was crushing. Absolutely system. And knowing what I know now, if I would have had a peer, an advocate to support me, to help me understand what my rights were, to help me understand the system, to avoid confusion, and just to let me know that I wasn't alone, that this happens to families, not just my family, would have been, again, that would have been life-changing. And I wish my family would have gotten that support, because I really think it would have changed the trajectory of all of our lives, right? Because support is preventative. So as we talk about support and how that builds resiliency, my question is, the Youth Justice Innovation Fund is a clear link to diminish disparities and provide these crucial peer services, which would have helped me and so many families in a situation just like mine. What is DCJS and the legislature doing to provide these critical family and youth peer support services for New Yorkers?
Well, thank you for that. And I hope your boys are good now, or, are on their way to doing, well. I can speak for DCJS. I cannot speak for the legislature. I do believe, that we know more. We know more now, right? We know more than we did just 10 years ago about youth development, about the criminal justice system. I think for many people, they believed, that the system was working. Many of us knew that it wasn't. But it took, a lot of work I would say a lot of work over the last decade has provided, kind of empirical evidence, right, that it wasn't working. And so we are, at DCJS, we've been invested for a long time now in the work of peer support, specifically for youth involved in the system, but also for families, right? We always at DCJS, we talk a lot about how if a young person has justice involvement, then we're there for them. If they have other things happening at the family level, they have OCFS. But if they haven't experienced any of that yet, there's no real state agency that owns them. And so, imagine if upon the first contact with justice, you have other kids in that home, we know how to get there. We know what help to offer. And what I mean by that is DCJS can support that work. I don't think it's the role of DCJS to be in your home or to talk to your kids. I think that we support the work of folks in the community who are doing that. But I do believe that it is, and again, I've been in government now for 8 years. I was gonna say I'm new to this, but we know so much more now, right, as practitioners that we didn't know just 10 years ago. And so I think that has allowed us to change in how we're investing. And I know that at DCJS through OYJ, the Office of Youth Justice, we fund those programs. We also fund them through our ATI work, Alternatives to Incarceration, right, dealing with whether someone is coming back home from prison or is coming back home from a hospitalization, everybody's trying to put it all back together. And I think that's the role that we can play. but we don't play it, as state employees, trying to do that work. We play it by supporting the folks on the ground who are doing that work, right? Community-based organizations through, whether it's OMH or ACEs and all of that that's needed. But we're at this critical point where we learn that lesson, right? Where we know that that's important, and that's part of all the work that we do, right? Listen to folks on the ground, listen to the input from people who have been through that, those things. So I'm sorry that your family had to go through it at a time when, I wasn't in government and people didn't know, or maybe they should have known. But this is all new. Like, we're having a healing conference in 2 weeks out of the Office of Youth Justice. And we made space for 250 people, and then we had to open up. Our max is 400 and we have 450. There's a waiting list, which tells me that these are people from across the state, across the nonprofit sector, a lot of young people or people working with young people, which tells us that people are hungry for this knowledge and they're counting on us to bring it to them. So my challenge to the staff is we better make sure we have it, and we have to make sure that we're bringing as many, voices to the table. Did that answer your question, Tanya?
Sort of.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
In my
I'm
best.
just wondering how the role of family and youth peers support services directly being offered and increasing the availability. I remember a few years ago, you would walk into family court and there were advocates everywhere. Now you don't see any, and we need them. Families need them, especially in the juvenile justice system.
Yes, I agree. And I'll look into it further. I just had a meeting this week with someone who's doing that in the Bronx, providing kind of beyond just the criminal justice, but the civil, the needs that people have for lawyers in civil matters, whether it's housing or custody and stuff like that. So, I mean, we absolutely believe in that. And I think people are doing that work. I think it's split among agencies, like I mentioned, OCFS and others who are doing that work. But I'm happy to take a deeper dive with your staff, separately from this.
We'll certainly take you up on that, and I really appreciate your response and centering equity and what the state government can do better. I appreciate your answer. I'm now going to pass it on to Tyrus.
All right. Good afternoon, Commissioner. My name is TJ, hailing from Brooklyn, New York, serving as a family training coordinator as Families Together. With extensive experience as both a youth and a parent advocate, having worked in residential treatment and leading men's support groups, I've witnessed concerning trends, particularly the rise in youth and men's suicides, coupled with limited job education prospects. Through my work, I've observed a disconnection among men from the economy, society, and workforce, evident in the rising crime and suicide rates. It's evident that fostering a sense of belonging and support is crucial for youth to thrive. I would like to know what New York State's efforts are in providing positive roles for young men to deter criminal involvement and establishing safe spaces for those grappling with hopelessness and mental health issues.
Well, thank you for the question. And before I answer your question, I just want to say, to everyone who's on, that I know there are questions in the Q&A, but I can't do multifunction, so I'll get to them eventually, because every time I click, I'm afraid I'm going to click out. So I'll come back to the people who are asking in the Q&A. So what I find interesting, and I want to be completely honest, is that's just the way I am. My staff will correct whatever I might say wrong later. But when you say, in New York State's efforts in providing, role models, like, I really believe that's not the role of the state. I believe that's the role of the community. That's the role of the individual communities and the adults that are in the, in the communities where these youth are. I don't think it's the role of the state. I mean, as me to come in and say, I'm gonna be a role model. I think it's the work of the state to fund that work, and that there are definitely people in government who can be those role models. But I'm not an advocate of the model that says, we who work in government or we who work in the big nonprofits, we have all the answers and we know how to do this. I think what we have to do as state as state policymakers, right, is to fund the effort of the community to do that. Where are the role models in Buffalo? Where are the, I mean, and we work with them all the time. Where are the role models in Buffalo? We have a group called Raw Tools that's doing an after-school program where they're taking the materials from melted weapons, guns, and I don't know how they do that, and then they're making jewelry, right? They're trying to make something beautiful out of what came out of violence, right? And it's very innovative that we fund it through RISE. And so I really believe strongly in the role of the community to heal itself and to tell us what they need. And in that vein, right, not to reject your question, but to say it's not our role to provide the positive role models, it's our role to provide the resources so that we can find, identify, and fund that activity at the community level, and that it's tailored to Buffalo and it's tailored to Syracuse and the Bronx, wherever it's needed. Does that make sense, TJ?
Yeah, I wasn't really alluding. It does make sense. Don't get me wrong. I wasn't alluding to necessarily a role model, but I guess to kind of mirror, to kind of keep our youth off the streets and possibly provide them with more accurate means of success. We used to have more trade in, let's say, high schools, right? But now we have kids dropping out. Kids are not reading, especially in the brown and black, not reading on a 5th grade level by the time they drop out or graduate, if they graduate at all. Leading towards I guess there was other additional programs that that were there, like Big Brother, things like that, but those have kind of diminished. So I do believe a village raises a child. I will never negate that because that's actually one of my mottos. But just being in New York with all these resources and these, we're seeing that a lot of them are not being distributed where they need to be. It's you'll find programs in already established, well-off neighborhoods more than you would in a low income. So then, I mean, we could break down the barriers of what keeps us or prevents us from reaching those. But I guess my question is, from being in being born in an underprivileged community, but having the self-will, whether it's being adopted or God's graces, I was able to turn my life around from running the streets, but not everybody has that, so and then I got into the work. I'll be able to try and provide those supports, but yet we are so embedded with this, these low poverty communities, and a sense of selflessness, because we could talk about history and how, most poor people don't want to be in the projects, but you're cattled there. But what's around the projects? Liquor stores. We don't live in the South, but you would see a gun store for sure. Things that are not really uplifting and building. Yes, we want to build our communities. Yes, we want to have our own role models, and we do. But that's also not advertised on TV. That's not, what is it? Music, sports, and that's what's glamorized. That's what's showing our kids what it is to be successful. So I guess what I'm looking for when I ask the question to the government, what other plans or resources do we have to start gearing our children, or gearing our young people, gearing our men to be a part of the community, to actually be able to succeed? To what's an additional out there? What's the state doing to help show that they see the concern and they're willing to help, develop our communities? If I'm gonna break it down.
I would say that, the governor has expressed, in many different ways, one through the investment and also one through the appointment of people who are different than the people who have been in government before. You say not everybody has that. It's I believe to my core that everybody can have that. It's our responsibility, with the legislature, with folks in government, to provide that everybody can have that. Everybody can have those opportunities. We know where the distressed communities are. It's not an accident when we look across the DCJS space, when we look at where we have SNUG programs, where we have communities that have experienced, rise in violence, where we've been able to bring that down, almost to a map. If you overlay the map, you will see challenging school districts. So when I came on board, 2 years ago, we started meeting. They were already meeting, but we have regular conversations with, we have Betty Rosa, who's now at the head of the education system. We have leadership in in OCFS, we have leadership in DCJS, OMH, and we're all talking to each other. We're looking at the geography and we're trying to identify who are the local people that we can strengthen and help to do exactly what you're saying.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I echo everything TJ said in terms of what business. It isn't just this DCJS's fault or responsibility, to your point, but it certainly falls on communities. But communities have been enduring for decades now these forces that you're talking about that are eroding their resources and their ability to show up for each other, and they need help reversing these trends. And certainly we want to see more investments from the state and thoughtful investments and collaboration to move that in a different direction. So I appreciate your comments and thank you for responding. And TJ, thank you for all that extra follow-up and thinking on your toes. I'm going to now pass it to Onyx.
Thank you, Commissioner, and good to see you. So I'll jump right in. Question's a bit lengthy, so bear with me. But as a youth advocate that organizes and works with young people, I've seen the impact that an arrest and a criminal record can have on our future, especially young people from minority communities. So it's important that we think about minors and their ability to advocate for themselves. When they're put in a situation like arrest, they're often compelled to waive their rights to an attorney during interrogations, which can lead to high rates of false confessions compared to other groups, right? If you don't know any better, you won't do any better. And so due to implicit bias, youth of color are much more likely to experience an arrest or face a sentence and all the adverse impacts that come with carrying a record. With odds stacked against us, it's even more important, and it's become a need to pass the Right to Remain Silent Act and the Youth Justice and Opportunities Act to even the odds with arrests and sentencing. So there's a lot that I said there, but I wanted to give you some context and frame so that way you can understand that it is a real struggle that young people of color really have struggled with for the longest stretch of time. As long as they've existed in this country, young people of color have struggled with this. And it only gets worse the less that they know. And with homeless young people becoming another community that struggles, it's becoming even more important, right? Because not only do they not have the adequate support systems to teach them, but then they're in more compromising situations to interact with the law. So my question is, where is New York State with passing these laws, right? So the Right to Remain Silent Act and the Youth Justice and Opportunities Act. And some context to really emphasize the importance is young people can't wait to have their constitutional rights protected, and they also can't wait to have their records sealed so that they have a chance after release, right? So I'm gonna leave you with that, and hopefully we can hear something insightful.
So, I mean, I hope the senator joins us at some point because I think he needs to speak for the ledge. I am prohibited from commenting on pending legislation. I'm not familiar with, the two that you mentioned. You all know that the governor did sign the Clean Slate Act, and that's something that we at DCJS are involved in implementing. I will say that, I get calls several times a month from parents and families who are trying to help youth, but they call me after they've already taken a plea or they've been advised by an attorney, and I'm like, you gotta ask for help before that, because the way the system works, I can't do anything after that has been done. We need a broad education of folks, specifically families of young people on the judicial system and kind of the whole system, and we're involved in doing that through OIJ, through the Office of Youth Justice. But I can't speak for the legislature, or kind of everyone in the state. The best way to avoid all of this is to come away from the practice of arrest and incarceration, for everything. I was watching the South Carolina girls this weekend. There was a little melee in in the basketball game and somebody's brother jumped on and they arrested him. They took him out in handcuffs. And all week I was like, I don't know why they had to handcuff this person. You know, it was the sports. It's a contact sports. Things happen. But we as a society, right? We're responsible for that. We've asked for this. We are this prosecutorial, you know, society. I was mentioning to someone I spoke to. I've been doing a lot of public speaking the last few days, but when I was in the past administration, I was managing one of these control rooms for the pandemic, in the middle of the pandemic, and I would get calls 3 or 4 times a week of people saying, when is the governor going to start, you know, arresting people for not wearing their masks? So we're in a place in society where we only know the solution is for everything is call the cops and arrest people. And I was like, we don't need to arrest people. We went in 3 months, like we taught a whole country how to mask up and wash their hands. Like we did really well. But people still feel when they're pressed or stressed that the only solution is, you know, is arrest and incarceration. And I think collectively we have to stand against that. You know, once you start a record, you know, I was visiting, I did 20 cities in the last 2 years. And in one of the towns we went, I won't name it, but the police chief said, we just arrested a 9-year-old, you know, with a gun. And I said, well, with due respect, if a 9-year-old has a gun, there's like 10 adults I want to talk to first, right? Like, what happened? Where did it start? What's the forensics, right? And so too often, people just respond to the headline, and then they're like, oh, you know, kids are a mess, you know. And I'm like, no, it's a lot to say that a 9-year-old has a gun. Where do they live? Why did they feel? Who did, you know, all of that. I was in the Bronx yesterday. We had a 6-year-old, I think it was early grades, a 6-year-old, I think a 6-year-old is in 1st or 2nd grade, brought a gun to school. We have the anti-gun violence program in the Bronx, part of the SNUG team. We have a SNUG team at Jacoby Hospital. And so, you know, I know that's a long-winded way to answer your question. I just think that we have a collective responsibility to have all that information before the arrest. As to addressing kind of the legislation you answered, I think, you know, that's being done kind of on the back end. But it's really hard, you know, even when you're trying to get your record sealed or when you're having, you know, you need a certificate of relief, you have to go back to the original place, the original court. It's a court thing, right? And if the judge is not alive, you have a whole process. I mean, it's very hard to clean up a record. So my solution is, let's not have the record to begin with. Let's figure out alternatives to that for young people so they don't have that hanging over their head. And that's the work, kind of the proactive work that we're involved in here at DCJS.
Just really quickly before I pass it back to Brad, I just had one follow-up because I like what you said and I agree with some of the things that you said. And I think it goes back to the communication that you and TJ had about all hands on deck and how it takes a village. I think my question, I recognize that you can't answer about like legislation right now. My question also is a question of urgency, right? Like, how urgent is this to you, right? Right. So there are solutions, and I'm excited to get into those solutions. I'm sure all the folks here are excited to do that. I'm just wondering if this is something that you see as urgent, or if this is something that you think we can take our time with.
Well, you know, I should say that, you know, I came to government after a 30-year career in media. And I came to government willingly. I left a CEO job in media in a beautiful office in Brooklyn because I wanted to work in criminal justice. I wanted to help. I've taught in 4 prisons in New York State. I taught in Sing Sing for 4 years. You know, I've been inside the system. I've worked with many of the organizations that are doing work in the space. I specifically worked a lot in reentry, but I understand the issues. Since before I came to state government, I served as the chair of the Governor's Reentry Task Force, which was started in 2014. And now I chair the Council on Community Justice, which is a kind of a rebranding, you know, for the new work that's to be done. And so I'm also very involved in the clemency panel, you know, for the last two governors. And so, I am someone who is very interested in solutions. I wouldn't put a timeline on anything. And to me, everything is urgent. We have a minute in this movie and we don't know how long that minute is. So I understand in a very visceral way, the issues that you are describing. But I am a commissioner of a state agency and government moves at a different pace. And since I've been here, we have moved at such a pace that people have retired because the work was overwhelming, right? We were like, we need to get this money out the door. We need to do this. And so I think if you ask around about me, you will understand kind of in a more, I don't know, in a more serious way, the answer to the question, like, is it urgent for me? Of course it's urgent for me. I think, these are all my kids. And I have 10 nephews, and, and they have me. And I'm like, what happens to the nephews who don't have me? Like that's the kind of aunt and mama bear that I am.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. And to Onyx's point and yours, recognize you can't comment on pending legislation. I think I'll take this opportunity for the audience who may not know. Families Together is a member of the Right to Remain Silent Act Coalition, which would ensure that young people don't waive their right to an attorney under the age of 18 when they get an arrest. That is one mechanism that we think could help prevent arrests going further or false confessions, which Onyx alluded to, is something that happens very frequently with young people under the age of 18 who don't know their rights or think that they can talk their way out of an arrest and give away evidence that makes their case much more difficult to move forward with. We're also big proponents of the Youth Justice and Opportunities Act, which would allow for a version of youthful offender status to be eligible up to age 24, and would allow for mandatory record sealing for misdemeanors. These are two pieces on very different ends of the spectrum of arrest and sentencing that Onyx is talking about. That if passed today would make a huge difference in the implicit bias and these negative outcomes that Onyx was talking about and that are happening actively. And so Onyx, I really appreciate your follow-up around urgency. And coming back to community, to the Commissioner's point, we are that community. And on March 19th, we're going to be promoting these two bills. And after the budget's passed, it's going to be all hands on deck. So please keep your eyes out. And we'll be pushing for this. Senator Bailey is a sponsor, for instance. Unfortunately, he's not here. He would certainly speak on this. But there's so much that we can do to impact this work and move those two bills forward, which we plan to. So thank you. I'll comment on it. I know you can't, Commissioner. So then I'm now going to pass it forward to Priscilla Romero. That's the last scripted question.
Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Priscilla Romero. I was born and raised in New York City, particularly the Bronx.
Me too.
And although I'm a parent now, a young adult, oh yeah, Bronx mate. I'm a young adult now. I'm more responsible. I have better judgment, but I was not always like this. I had many involvements within the justice system when I was growing up as a teenager. My younger brother also grew up exposed to similar situations and environments. Many of his peers have justice system involvement and got caught up in cycles of violence. Some of them have passed away because of violence. Part of what has helped my brother steer clear of the danger and that community has been community programs, which has fostered a sense of identity and belonging for him. We need third spaces in our communities. We need more initiatives like Project Rise and the Youth Justice Innovation Fund, which allows community organizations to directly implement cultural appropriate programs that build up our young people. Given the positive impact programs like this have, it's frustrating to learn that hundreds of millions of raise the age dollars have gone unspent by the state. I could name several programs in my neighborhood that divert young people towards positive paths and prevent crime that never see a drop of state money. Allowing local community-based organizations to directly apply for state RTA implementation funds rather than going through their counties would remove bureaucratic barriers to creating prevention and diversion programs like this. So too often we wait until these youths are already in the system before we provide resources and opportunities, which you did you did brought up and you did mention. So my question is, what is New York State doing to advance community-led initiatives that offer alternatives that help young people start their juvenile justice journey before it even begins, or at least provide them an alternative path once they are involved?
So, I mean, I can tell you what DCJS is doing. We've talked about Project Rise is one aspect of that, the money through Office of Youth Justice as well. We are prepared to reallocate some of that RTA money, but a lot of that money, when we say the state hasn't spent it, it's not true. You know, the state has given it to the counties for the implementation of Raise the Age, and I'm not sure I can take it back, but wherever we've been asked to, you know, we have provided a way, you know, to kind of spend down that money and to invest in kind of the infrastructure. Some of the implementation has taken longer. You know, everybody wasn't happy about the implementation, but we believe that that was the right thing to do. So we're looking to expand Project Rise. Remember, Project Rise came to communities that were already involved in the work, through Give and through Snug. And
I'm
so
sorry, you're freezing on my end.
I'm freezing.
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't get, you were freezing.
Okay. So Project Rise, it was the communities that we funded in Project Rise were communities that were already in our DCJS, you know, world through Snug, right? And so we already knew people in the community were doing work there. Snug is the anti-violence program. And so what we're looking to do is try to expand Rise to other communities. Because, you know, the way you got Snug was you had a high level of crime or shootings. So I was in Binghamton this summer and they were like, how do we get Snug? And I was like, you don't want to say you need more shootings. You know, we have to figure out how do we use the tactics that we have that have been successful in these Rise communities and Snug communities, and now help communities who are not battling high shootings, but who are battling, you know, disengaged youth. In Utica, people were like, we used to have rec centers and after school programs, and now we don't have that, you know. And in Syracuse, even when you have these centers, kids can't cross a certain street, right? And so, and in many communities, when the Rise, you know, how we do Rise is we bring everybody to a table and we say, what do you want us to invest in? A lot of folks asked for two things. One was mental health services. And the second thing is, you know, stipend type of work, you know, work that provides, because, you know, between the age, I don't know what your age, the age is, you know, for the kind of your catchment, but 15 to 19 is the crucial age where they really have no agency. You can't do anything without your parents' signature. But if you're not in school, we should be able to have you engaged in something that is either leading to employment or is employment, or, and so that's what we're looking to, you know, to fund, that kind of stipend or whatever you want to call it, you know, ability to stand on your own 2 feet. You know, many of the kids who wind up in, you know, either crime or gangs or other things, you know, they're not looking for money to buy sneakers. They're looking for money to support their own families, right? They're literally trying to work. And when you're 15, 16, it's very hard to find a job. And then if you have a record already, so we're working, you know, with the community groups that we work with through Rise to fix all that, and also to go to the businesses in the area and kind of put their feet to the fire and bring, you know, I bring my colleagues, you know, in other state agencies to say, well, you guys are doing economic development. When you build something, there should be jobs for the dads and there should be jobs, you know, for the youth. But, you know, even in some communities, in 2 years ago when I was in, I think it was Syracuse, we had summer jobs. The governor put extra money for more summer jobs because that's the summer that we thought was going to be hot because the shootings were way up. That was the summer of 22. And some kids, they couldn't get their birth certificate. They had moved around, the parents didn't have it. Some parents were like, I'm too busy to go looking for that now. Or the parents weren't around, and whoever was their guardian didn't have. And so it was so frustrating to me, because I'm like, the school has your birth certificate, but they can't get it without their parents' signature. And so there's sometimes we have these challenges that I feel as adults we should be able to solve, right? To keep kids engaged and to provide an opportunity for an experience that is enriching, but that can also be employment, that can lead to something else, or that can be vocational, because everyone is not, going to stay in school, and that, and we have to reconcile that, right?
Yes, and talking about, education and school, is there any hopes of like a partnership between the you guys and, like partnering with the school system, the Department of Education for programs like these?
Right, we do already, as I mentioned, Betty Rosa is the head of SCD, and we, in many of our SNEL communities, our street work, they call themselves street workers, the outreach workers in SNUG are already going into schools and talking to kids about gun violence, about avoidance, about, some kids have this already in their household. We're also looking at a potential summit later this year around this specific issue of getting to youth before they have that first encounter, but also even if they have the encounter, right? Your life is not over, that we can make those repairs. Similar to the healing conference, we're so overwhelmed by the response, we're like, people need solutions. But we also don't want to pretend that DCJS has all the answers. We have money, but we need help with the answers. So we want to bring people to the table so that they can inform, those answers. And I think that's been a winning strategy for us, and that actually puts us out there too. I got beat up a lot out there, because people were angry at other people, other governors or other efforts. But when you get past that and you hear people actually have, solutions for their own communities. And I do believe it's the work of government to fund those solutions.
Thank you so much, Commissioner.
Yes, thank you so much, Priscilla, for your question and for sharing a little bit about yourself and what your family's going through, and to the Commissioner for your thoughtful response. I do want to be a little, it's not a challenge really, it's just to clarify, I think for us, the Raise the Age funding and where it is and where it isn't, and understanding is it's $250 million that was allocated for implementation every year since it was originally enacted. And it was up to the counties to apply for it, to submit their plans, have those approved by 3 different agencies, and then start drawing that money down. And of course, COVID got in the way of some of that. I think we have to recognize, but still, I think we're close to now $1 billion being appropriated, and very little of that comparatively have actually been drawn down by the counties. And when you're hearing about the ideas and you in your own experience with Project Rise, for instance, of all the creative and imaginative solutions that, and these communities are solution oriented, they have ideas, they don't have access to the state funding. They don't have the mechanisms to draw down state dollars or apply for those state grant portals and everything that comes along with it. Yeah, I know and so the Raise the Age Coalition has been advocating, and I think successfully, hopefully this year, advocating for a separate pot of funding that has nothing to do with the counties. That says, okay, we want a state agency to identify who these community partners are and build relationships, grant funding relationships directly with those programs, directly with those community-based organizations. So we can sort of, because it seems like maybe county probation isn't always the most imaginative or in touch with some of the community partners that are really doing the work, but don't get paid, to Priscilla's point. So just wanted to share that because I think it's important for our audience, especially, which we got the Youth Justice Innovation Fund included in the Senate and the Assembly. And the Assembly was $50 million. The Senate's only $5 million. So we can forgive them if they correct that.
I'm not sure about everything you said about the Raise the Age funds. I'm going to take a look at that. I think there's a lot more spent than you think, but it was, there's separate within that money, there's money for implementation, and then there's money for, all the stuff you just showed. I'm happy to take a closer look at that. I know we've been talking a lot about it. But at the end of the day, in my view, it's not a money issue. I mean, we can find the money. It's, you have to have this change. And like, you mentioned with probation, I mean, we're in the room all the time with probation officers. We do training. We train everybody in the, in the spectrum of law enforcement. And I was just at a graduation on Friday of the workforce development program we do at DCJS, and we had 11, about a dozen graduates. Some of them are probation officers, some of them are parole officers, some of them are community folks who are, really invested in the success of people assigned to them. And I see examples of that every day. Those are the folks who never make the headlines, but I can tell you, I've been, to all these cities, and it was a probation person, I think in Binghamton, who said, how can we get snug here? We're looking at the programs we have that have worked to bring down crime and have worked, like RISE. We want to bring those to communities who are not maybe facing that high incidence, but there's a void, right? In New York City, those of you who are from New York City, we're kind of spoiled. We have a plethora of options, right? Of folks, whether you got out of prison or you need, you have special needs, there's a lot of places you can go. In many parts of the state, especially the rural areas, or in places like even Nassau, where in Newburgh, you can get a job, but you can't get to it, right? You don't have the transportation that you have. And so we're looking to fill kind of all of those gaps. Some of that goes beyond our scope of DCJS, but we're not afraid, to step in other people's lanes. What we want is for what we call the whole enterprise that is state government to function, period, and to help communities become whole.
Well, I'm sure everyone in this audience couldn't agree more with that sentiment. I'm going to, rather than just queue up any of these Q&As, we are out of questions and running short on time. If you have, maybe in light of what you see in the Q&A section, just give you a chance to give a few closing remarks, maybe a minute or two, and then we'll wrap things up.
Yes. Someone mentioned that Snug and Syracuse can't get in. We have a lot of challenges in parts of the state where we're not allowed in the schools. And there's a reason, we hire people with lived experience. So sometimes school folks are like, I don't know if I want to let somebody with a record into the school, which totally denies that this is an uncle or a father. So we're working on those issues. We're working with each local government as we get there to kind of handle that. We understand, but also, we put a lot of pressure on schools, and I think we have to also look at solutions that are not completely dependent on the school, but that, on the folks in the community. The other one, somebody mentioned, how does DCJS plan to work with other child serving systems? We work with all of them. We work with all the things that exist, and we work with kind of linking them up to the practitioners in the criminal justice space, the traditional practitioners, to kind of open that communication. And, I think that we see our role that way, to kind of expand the circle, not to just keep talking to cops and DAs and all the folks. What I found as I went around the state and I met these folks, there's one, I want to call everybody out by name, but this sheriff I met in another part of the state, the first meeting, it was rough. But I also came to understand, so people have their views and they've been at their job for a long time, but also he's doing some amazing, spectacular work in the jails, because, the sheriff's from the jails. So he's got every kind of education and vocational program in the jails. He's got about 600 people in those jails. And so I came to really have, the highest regard, for the work that he's doing. We funded that work, and it's, it's kind of bearing fruit. But it's very hard to, I'll end with this, because Jamal Bailey stood me up, so let the record show that we are in the process. We're in the process, you with your work, of changing, not just changing system, but changing mentalities. And, I can tell you, I've worked now for 2 years. I've seen up front the work that we've done at DCJS, police departments all over the state. There's almost 550 of them. they have done the work. They have done the implicit bias training. They have retrained. People have retired. They have really done this work, and they put plans together, right? But what we haven't done, or we haven't had time yet, right, is also a retraining of the public in how to utilize police. So if people call police, for someone who's having, a mental health episode, right? And they're not trained for that. Many of them are not trained for that. I mean, we're working on that. I'm on the Daniel Law Task Force to do that. What I'm trying to say is that we are all collectively in a period of our history, which is a period of change. And change is always hard and it's messy. And I understand the job that you guys are doing. I'm very grateful for it. And the work that, Jamal Bailey's doing in the legislature. We all have our roles, me as a commissioner, but sometimes we're so embroiled in fighting, or telling us off or telling people off in government. And I just want you to know, we're also not a monolith. People in government, I've met some of the most brilliant and committed people in government, people who could, I would say people like me, people who could be making a lot more money. This is not a sexy job. Other people travel to LA. I traveled to Albany, in the winter. I got snowed on last week in Syracuse. So we make sacrifices to do public service. And the people at DCJS, we have some of the smartest people working on policy, getting money out the door, looking at data. And they're people who really believe in making the world a better place. And I can promise you there are more people like that in state government than the folks that people talk about. And so, I just think it takes us working together from all angles. I will never stop you, from doing what you have to do. I want you to use the best information, that we can provide. And the same thing for the legislature, when we go before them and they grill us, but, we also try to keep them informed about, what's happening. Senator Bailey's been a great supporter of SNUG. We're in Mount Vernon and we're in the Bronx. I don't know if he covers the part of the Bronx where we're there with SNUG. But anyway, all of that to say that we all have our roles to play and it doesn't have to be adversarial, but I want you to recognize in the work that you do, because it's hard work, that we are and I think we're fortunate that we are in this moment of history where we are making change that we couldn't see 10 years ago. And to me, it's beautiful. I mean, to me, it's spiritual, it's beautiful, it's hard work. And sometimes it feels like it's not getting done fast enough, to the point that Onyx made, but it's happening. I see it every day. It's happening. We are making impact. We are helping people. Sometimes it's one at a time. And I tell you, some days I tell my staff, I should have a desk at Grand Central because people call me for all the random stuff, and people in our communities. I come from the Bronx. We don't come from a tradition of access. And I think Tanya mentioned earlier, she knew, or she had available, it would have been a different story. And I feel strongly that we know more, we know better, so we should do better. And that's kind of how I come, to work, to do this work every day. So I appreciate your time and your grilling, and you guys are like, Barbara Walters over here with the follow-ups and the other follow-ups, but I really have enjoyed my time with you. And please, Brad, send me an email with any follow-ups that I promise I will get back to you, but I may not remember. So I just want to stop there and thank you all, for your time and for the questions.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say that Senator Bailey's office sends the regrets. He ended up having to be on the floor, so he was in session. So
tell him he owes me something, lunch.
We'll tell him that you represented very well.
Yes, that I represented his borough. I hope I have.
You have, and thank you for recognizing the tenacity of the folks on the call. They are all people who work at Families Together, and our thinking is that if we have good people that can be spreading the word, the biggest thing that advocates can do is question. And so we will continue to do that. And we appreciate that you recognize the value of that. And we recognize the value of the partnership and your recognition of our need to be sometimes pushy, because for us, particularly young people, it feels like a snail's pace. You know, when we were working on Raise the Age, it was many years of advocating, and each year that it was happening, there were kids who used to be 14, used to be 12, who are now getting arrested as an adult at the age of 16, and we couldn't, you know, it was just tearing our hair out. So we are anxious to move forward as fast as possible. We recognize as advocates that sometimes it's not possible within bureaucracies, and that's where we can work together.
For sure.
Thank you for
And,
joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
And thanks everybody for joining. And if you can come to our Family Empowerment Day on Tuesday, the 19th, that would be great. And if you go to our website, you can look at the prep call that we're having, or the informational call that we're having on Friday at noon. Thanks again for everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.